Kristin Sullivan, the Executive Director at the Ward Museum, and we are excited today to talk to Larry Barth, who is one of the three 2020 to 2021 living legends. And Larry is originally from Marionette, Wisconsin. He now hails from Stallstown, Pennsylvania. He says he developed a keen interest in wildfowl art from a young age when his mother was an avid bird watcher and his father was a woodworker. During the fall of his freshman year, though, his family attended the 1976 Ward World Championship, and following this, Larry tailed his activities to support his intention of carving birds, and it paid off. Because of his remarkable regard for the essence of species, Larry has been regarded as a master of simplicity, really removing anything unnecessary and carefully leaving the feeling or essence of a natural scene in his work. His award-winning pieces have been shown in museums and private collections around the world, and as of 2019, I believe he's taken home an amazing 17 Best in World titles. So welcome, Larry Barth.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much for doing this. We're excited to have you in this unusual virtual presentation as part of our Ward World Championship.
Well, glad to be here.
So I guess to start a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, how you got into wildflower? I know I teased a little bit, but I know there's more.
Well, it's kind of a rehash of what you just went through. I remember being interested in birds at a very young age, my whole life. And I attribute that to my mother and her side of the family. She had two sisters who were avid bird watchers, more avid than she was, but she was very interested in birds as well. And so I simply grew up with that interest being nurtured. And I don't think that they had to talk me into it. I think I had the interest, as well, just part of my nature. And then my father was a civil engineer by profession, but his hobby was woodworking, specifically carving. In an old world tradition, chisels and that German Swiss style and tradition. He wasn't a bird carver at all, but I had the interest in birds came first, and then I expressed my interest in birds through artwork, and that eventually moved from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. And that's when I started spending more time in the basement in the wood shop, starting to carve birds. And I didn't know anyone else carved birds. It was simply putting together the interests that I had and the opportunities that were available to me in my dad's shop. And I carved birds for several years before I knew anyone else carved birds. I knew about decoys, but I didn't carve decoys. I carved the birds that I knew, and at this point I was in southwestern Pennsylvania, and was most excited about the songbirds that I would see in the area around our home. On a family trip, we bumped into the Ward show. We actually saw signs for the spring competition, but we had missed it. We came back to the fall show in 1975. I think you said 76, but it was actually 75, the fall show. And then, and I was blown away. It just changed everything. And I went home. I was a college freshman at that time. I went back and spent the winter carving an entry, and entered the spring competition in 76 in the novice class, and everything has gone from there onward and upward. I still live in southwestern Pennsylvania. Grew up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, but now live out in a more rural setting where I can't really see any other lights from my house at night, mostly because I'm in a bit of a hollow, a bit of a ravine. There's people all around me, but I can't see them. I'm on my own. I've got a perfect piece of property for a bird carver, right along a creek, birds all around all the time. And I just have never grown tired of birds and representing them artistically.
Interesting. Why birds?
I'm sorry, can you give me that again?
Sure. Why birds? You know, what is it that's captivating about them?
Well, I don't question why birds, because I've always simply accepted why not. I mean, it's just birds. But when I think about what it is that excites me about birds, I find that, for one thing, they're so visible. They are one of the most visible forms of life in the natural world, other than plants, which can't run away or fly away. Uh, it's a whole lot easier to find birds than it is to find wild mammals. You can go for months without seeing a fox. You can go for years or a lifetime without seeing a wolf or a moose. Or I see deer quite frequently, more than I want to. We have too many around here. But birds are just so accessible, and they enliven the landscape. You take a walk, and the highlight of that walk was the grouse that you flushed, or the hawk that flew overhead. Birds punctuate the landscape, and I've always gravitated toward a natural landscape rather than an urban one. And birds are the highlight of any day afield. And their patterns, their colors, their shapes, their forms, their sounds, their movements have just always excited me. So it's just natural for me that I choose birds as my main subject matter.
Makes sense. Thank you. So, what's something that you've learned over the years that you wish that you knew when you were younger, related to carving?
Yeah. That could be a long list if I had time to think it all through. I this is perhaps not the right venue to say what's coming to my mind right now, since I'm talking to the Ward Foundation. But I wish I had learned to care less about competition earlier, and lest I sound like I'm discouraging carvers from entering competitions. It's quite the opposite. I thrived on competition, and still do. But I use the competitions at this point as a motivational device for me personally. It doesn't matter whether I win or not. What matters is that I get a piece done, and the show gives me a fixed deadline to get a piece done, and I find that to be helpful. In my younger days, it mattered to me more whether I won or not, and to that end, I was trying to carve what I thought the judges wanted to see, and at a certain point, fairly long ago now, I came to realize that was the wrong approach. Still enter competitions, but carve what you want to carve rather than what you think the competitions are after. I think you'll do better work, and you'll probably end up doing better in competitions if you're carving what you're excited about rather than what you think someone else might be excited about.
Interesting. It's good advice. Can you tell us about a colossal failure that you've had? What just didn't go right at all, and how did you learn from it? Pardon me, or recover, or move on?
Well,
I know I've seen an exploded mold myself, or a model.
Yeah, there's been plenty of disasters in the studio. Some of them are quite comical. I remember once needing to get black paint out of a spray can so that I could shoot it through my airbrush instead. And I had been told by a neighbor exactly how to do that. You put a little roofing nail in a bowl, and then you put a cardboard tube over the nail, and you slide the the paint can down that cardboard tube, and it hits that roofing nail down at the bottom, and that punctures the can, and all the paint drains out the bottom of the can, and now you have a nice bowl full of the contents of your spray can. Well, this sounded great. I slid the paint can down the tube, and it hit the bottom, it hit the nail, and it started to rumble, and it took off like a rocket. And I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble. And I closed my eyes when the paint can cleared the tower, so to speak, when it cleared the cardboard tube. But I knew that paint was just going everywhere. And I had gotten the full blast of this right in the face. And I made my way blind from the studio back to the house. And I didn't dare open my eyes because I was afraid of what I'd get in them. And my entire head was spray painted black. And this was like 3 days before Ocean City. You know, it just, my hair and everything was just solid black. That was something that really didn't go right, but it didn't damage the piece. I work so methodically that it's not that often that I make a big mistake. It's not that I can't do something wrong. I make some bad decisions, but I simply can't afford to make those mistakes. You know, once I was holding a bird, and it was pretty far along, and I'm trying to hold it delicately, and I was holding it so delicately while I was working on it that it just slipped out of my hands. I just wasn't holding it tight enough, and so this bird hits the floor, and oh, it was terrible. That was a catastrophe, but those are accidents rather than mental errors or bad decisions. Well, you could call the paint can a bad decision, but they aren't me making a mental mistake. It's more of a physical mistake, and I find that those you can recover from. You can fix them. The ones that trouble you more are when you look at a piece a year later and you say, why in the world did I make that decision? You know, and I try very hard not to make those decisions. Can't say that I never make those decisions, but my work is quite methodical in the early stages. I make a fairly elaborate clay model because I can't afford those mistakes. I can't work on a piece for months and then say, oh, well, that was a mistake. I'll try again. I can't afford that inefficiency. So I work in a disciplined fashion to avoid those kind of mistakes.
Sure, that makes sense. What piece really required you to grow as an artist, maybe into a realm you hadn't considered before, or caused you to stretch some?
Well, it's a piece that I almost used to answer your last question, and it's one of my most recent. The title of the piece was Signs of Spring. It was an Eastern Phoebe on Pussy Willow, which won the World Championship and was in 2019. And that piece gave me fits. And that confounded me because you would think that a piece early in my career, if you want to call it a career, would have been more problematic when I was trying to learn the ropes and that sort of thing. And here I am, having been carving my whole life, and this recent piece, relatively, just gave me nothing but trouble. I was trying to do something a little different with the habitat. It was an all metal habitat, and so it was a bit of unknown territory for me personally, but I couldn't figure out why I was having so much trouble with that piece. And I truly struggled with it. And whereas I just told you that I make uh, a very disciplined plan on the Phoebe. I changed my plans as I went. I was shooting from the hip. Uh, I had a large piece of habitat that needed to be there while I was working in wood, but once I painted the bird, I eliminated it. I've never done that. I've never made such bold changes uh, that late in a piece, and I just didn't know if I was happy with the piece. I'm not sure if it came up to my expectations, what I envisioned or not, and I never did know until I photographed the piece. You know, had it professionally photographed when it was finished, and I came home from the photography session, and the photographer sent me the images on my computer, and I looked at them, and it was like seeing the piece for the first time. You know, I had struggled all the way through the piece, and never felt comfortable. It was really a dilemma for me, and it wasn't until I saw the photo of the finished piece that I really started to enjoy the piece. And then it did win the world championship, so it was in the museum for a year, and then because of the COVID shutdown, it was in there for more than a year. And when I did retrieve it, I hadn't seen it for a long time, and when I went into the museum uh, and went up to it in the case, it was like seeing it for the first time. And I remember thinking, well, that might be my favorite piece of all the things that I've done.
Huh.
It was just, and I still don't know how that all happened, but that's the piece that comes to my mind in terms of challenging me. And I think what seemed like such a challenge is that I simply didn't know where I was going with that piece at every step along the way, where normally I'm very planned out and I know exactly where it's going.
It's interesting. Well, I think my next question was going to be, what is the favorite piece that you've ever made? But with that one, is it more the aesthetics, or is it something about the process, or why did you end up landing there?
I think one of the reasons that I liked it is because, well, let me go back a bit. One of the, you know, this is a very representational, highly representational endeavor. The birds are very, very tight. The habitat tends to be very, very tight. Everything is as you would find it to be in nature. And I'm accustomed to working that way, but I also don't want my work to simply be a duplication of nature. I want to bring my artistic interpretation in whatever form that takes into it. And one of the things that I've always tried to do is create an opening to keep it from being so rigidly, dogmatically a duplication of nature, because I don't think you can get as far as you can working that way, just thinking if I duplicate this rock, it'll be good. It's not enough to simply go through the technical fabrication of the rock. You know, you have to have a reason for that rock to be in your composition. You have to have a reason for that shape of that rock. Everything has a reason. Everything gets thought, and so one of the things that I try and do is create openings that enable some vague, abstract components into the piece, and that can be a difficult thing to do because the work is so non-abstract. And that Phoebe piece, it was the branch, it was the setting where I was making a pussy willow branch out of metal and representing pussy willow instead of duplicating pussy willow. It was a conscious decision. I mean, I could have come up with what I think would have been fly tying techniques to make the little individual catkins of the pussy willow, and I could have duplicated pussy willow, but I felt like the piece would be stronger if, rather than duplicate it, I found a way to represent it artistically. And that became much more difficult than simply duplicating it, to find the right way of representing it. So my favorite pieces, I think, are the ones where I have succeeded to a greater degree along those lines, when some element in the piece is a representation of the component rather than a duplication of it. My birds tend to always be as realistic and as highly refined as I can make them, because I see birds as perfect and I see no reason to really deviate from their perfection. So that's why I'm very content carving the birds in a highly refined, as perfect as I can get them. But the habitat and the composition is where I get to play. And in that Phoebe piece, I played with the pussy willow. I did a shrike years ago that was in a hawthorn branch, where instead of duplicating that branch, I chose to represent it through a bare metal branch that I thought conveyed more than a duplicated branch would. It brought in the cold nature of a shrike, which is a pretty nasty bird for being a songbird, a passeriform. I've done a number of other pieces, a lot of them involving water, in which I chose to represent water rather than duplicate it. And those have been very satisfying. I think my favorite, I don't know that it's my favorite piece, but of all the pieces that I've done and have gotten away from me, I think of a little kingfisher that I did over a stream, where I carved the stream, and that was definitely representing water artistically, sculpturally, rather than duplicating it, because there's really no choice with water. You have to find a way to represent it, and that's a piece that came out. It was early in a series of water pieces, and I didn't really know where this was going, and it's one of the pieces that came out beyond my expectations, and usually that doesn't happen. Usually I have my expectations and the finished piece falls short of it. Other people don't have the expectations that I had in my head, so they see what I've done and they say, well, that's great. How can you be unsatisfied? But usually I pictured it being even better. And there's been a few cases where the pieces have come out at or beyond my expectations, and those are the ones that I think of as being some of my most successful pieces.
Great, thank you. Okay, here. What do you think is the most difficult part of your process, and how do you deal with that? And has it gotten easier with practice over the years?
Well, I have two answers for that. In terms of the hand skills, the most difficult part is painting. Mm-hmm. I think most carvers will agree with you there. And I think it's because the risk is so high. You spend months carving a piece and then you paint it in a matter of days. You either make or break it in a very short period of time, and it's just fraught with danger at every turn. And you can paint for a lifetime and still feel like you haven't a clue what you're doing. And painting is the most difficult hand skill part of the whole process. But I think I would say the most difficult part is got nothing to do with the hand skills. It's the conception. It's deciding what to do and how to do it. It is not enough for me to simply say, oh, I'd really like to do such and such a bird, and then sit down and do it, because the bird is not enough. I need a concept. I need a composition. I need the piece to make sense to me above and beyond the beauty of the bird. And that's I think the most difficult part, and the most critical part in a piece coming off as a piece of sculpture, is deciding, not figuring out how to do it, but deciding what to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. What's the most rewarding part of the process?
Painting. When it goes well. It's the worst part and the most devastating when it goes poorly. But when the painting does go well, there's a real high there. And I think because it does go quickly, it's all tied to the same thing, that short, intense painting session after months and months of preparing the canvas, so to speak. You know, if you're painting on canvas and you screw it up, you toss that canvas and get another one. I can't afford to toss 6 months because I screwed up the painting. So it has the most potential to thrill you when it goes well, and it can do an equally bad job on you when it goes poorly. It took me a long time to realize. I went into a black mood every time I painted a bird partway in, and I finally figured it out. I could carve like I could picture in my mind. I could texture like I could picture in my mind. Everything was happening the way I expected and intended, until painting. And then I pictured the real bird, and I couldn't paint as well as the real bird. And a quarter of the way into painting, I was defeated for the first time in the whole process. I realized that this isn't coming out the way I pictured it, and I can't make my hands do it because I was picturing the real bird, and I just couldn't do that. And I finally realized that I had to give up on trying to make it just as beautiful as the real bird. And the piece turned into a salvage operation. You know, the black mood, the down point, the low point was realizing that I can't paint this as well as I want to. And then I would say to myself, okay, so I can't paint as well as I want. Now my task is to make this object in front of me look as good as I can make it look. And instead of trying to match the real bird, I used the real bird as my guide, but I wasn't trying to duplicate it. I was trying to make my bird look as good as I could make it based on the real bird. That may sound like a little semantic trick, and maybe it is, but it freed me up from disappointment in painting and turned it into something that I could turn around and get it to a point where I was happy with it.
Sure, that makes sense. Makes sense. All right. So let's see here. 2 questions. One, what's something we don't know about you? What's a hidden talent unrelated to wildfowl carving and painting?
Oh gosh, I can write upside down and backwards.
Oh,
That's
fascinating.
As far as my interests outside of carving, if you do know me, then you'll know that I love canoes. I've built canoes. I use canoes as often as I can. The family and I take a wilderness canoe trip up into Ontario every year. I love canoes. I've got a couple of them up in the rafters of my studio. There have been times when my bird carving studio was a boathouse. I love making paddles.
And I imagine that that feeds into your ability to do some interesting birding and
Yeah, it's not totally unrelated to bird carving, because when I'm in the canoe, I'm usually looking for birds or looking at birds and enjoying what I see along the way. Um, it's the bird carving is so labor intensive and small scale that when I need a break from carving, I either go bird watching, which is not, it's a break from carving skills, but you're still thinking about birds, or I like uh, splitting firewood, gathering firewood, keeping my post and rail fence up. I like cutting stone. I'm doing the stonework on my studio. It's taken me forever. It's just been years and years. But if I'm not in the studio carving, I like going out and using just a completely different set of muscle groups. And it is a relief to me, an attention releaser, to go out and split firewood or haul rocks around, build stone walls, that sort of thing.
Excellent. And I know from when I was a curator that you like to vacuum. You're the only artist I've ever worked with that vacuum the gallery.
Yeah.
All sorts of things. All right. Well, as one of the three 2020, 2021 living legends, is there anything that you'd like to say to your mentors, peers, friends, or others who may be watching this video?
Well, I appreciate the honor, and I consider it that. It is an honor. I think back to 1975 when I walked into the Wicomico Civic Center at that time and saw bird carving for the first time. I just remember being in awe of it, wanting to be a part of it in every way and any way that I could. And to fast forward to today, being recognized as a living legend, I still feel like that little kid going to the award show in so many ways, and it's really quite humbling to be recognized in this way, in something that I could not have imagined at that time, and the steady progression over the years that has led to it has been defining part of my life. So I appreciate the Ward Foundation, the opportunities that it's given me, and I cherish the friendships and experiences that I've had through all the years that I've had an association with the Ward Foundation.
Well, thank you for everything you've done for the Ward Foundation and Ward Museum, and congratulations on. We're excited to celebrate you, and can't wait to celebrate in person next year at Ocean City together.
I think we're all waiting for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You bet.